Today we're going to talk about the Lilah sleeve. It's a sweet puff sleeve, but what makes it even sweeter is the keyhole opening at the bottom, and then it's closed with a tie at the very bottom of the sleeve. So let's get started. You'll need your pattern, you'll need your sleeve pattern, and then you'll need what's called a keyhole bias strip, and you'll need to cut 2 of those, and then you'll also need to cut the armband ties. And what I'd like for you to do when you cut the armband ties, cut them about 1 inch longer, just on one end, and I'll show you why in just a little bit. There'll also be some markings on the armband strip. There's a center marking and then a placement marking on each side of the center mark. Then, of course, you'll need to mark the usual things with your sleeve. So for the keyhole bias, I've gone ahead and pressed this just with my iron. And so what I did was I started obviously with it flat, and then I pressed it so that it's pressed in half with wrong sides together. Then I unfold it and press each raw edge to the center, to that where that crease is that you just made. And then one more press will be just to press it again so that you now have those 2 folded edges together, and you have a bias strip that is 1/4 of an inch wide. So we're just going to put that to the side for now. And then the next thing you're going to do is the end that you cut about 1 inch longer, I want you to cut at an angle. And it doesn't have to be a perfect angle, it's just that we want that point. Now we're going to use the bias tape maker. And what this is made by Clover, and it comes in several different sizes. This is a 1/2 inch size, and that's what we need, because once we use it for doing the first folds, then we are going to fold it again just like we did with the bias. But this is so much easier than using an iron and pressing these long strips without burning your fingers. So I've gotten this started, and if you don't see that point coming out the end, then you can just use a pin, and then it just comes right out. There's an opening right here where you can just slide a pin in there. So you can see now that as you pull this out, it folds the fabric for you, which is pretty cool. So your strip needs to be lightly starched. That will help those creases stay put. So as you pull bias tape maker, you're just going to slide your iron along right behind it. And you'll just want to be sure that you keep these edges just barely curled up on each side of that opening in the back. And then you can just, you can see how much faster and safer it is to use this bias tape maker. So I'm going to finish this up and do my other one, and then I'll show you what to do next. Okay, the next step is just like with the bias band. You fold your ties in half again and press those. And then I don't know if you are following along with the Lilah instructions or not, but you may have noticed that the Lilah instructions have you fold in the ends of the ties and then do the folding on the edge and then folding in half. And we didn't do that because we can't take that folded edge through the bias tape maker. So now you do need to unfold your ties just enough to fold in that that end 1/4 of an inch and press it, and then refold each side and then fold in half again. So we're going to put that aside for a second and move on to the keyhole. And with this keyhole, you're going to take your bias strip and I'm going to press this this little bias strip so that it just makes it a little easier to curve if you go ahead and press it in a curve. So you're pressing it with the open edges to the outside of the curve. That's the way they will be stitched when you're actually stitching them on the keyhole. And then next, open up this bias band enough to get one edge all the way exposed. That edge, you will pin the right side of the bias band to the wrong side of your fabric, the wrong side of your keyhole. So this band is a little bit longer than what you actually need. So when you get to the other end of the keyhole, you will have a little bit of this bias band to cut off. So I'm going to pin this all the way around, and then you're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam, and you'll actually be able to follow that crease that from the fold in your bias band. So you can see you'll have a little bit to trim off there. We would just rather you have a little bit to trim off than it not quite being the length you need. So I've got this pinned on. Before I trim anything off that end, I will go ahead and stitch this bias band on the keyhole. So this is what it's going to look like at this point. You'll have the wrong side of the sleeve facing up and the wrong side of the bias band facing up, because you have the right side against the wrong side of the sleeve. So I actually went ahead and did that first stitching and trimmed my end. So now I can, so it looked like this. And now you can just refold your bias so that it comes around and just covers the previous stitching line. And then if you have an edge stitch foot, you might want to use that. But what you're going to be doing is you're going to be stitching just a 1/16 of an inch, so really close to this edge that you're now folding to the outside of the sleeve. So I'm going to get this stitched, and then we will be back to attach the ties to our sleeve. Okay, so now I've got my keyhole stitched down with the bias band around it, and I've gone ahead and done the underarm seam because that's the next step. Then the next step will be matching the center of your sleeve tie with the underarm seam. And we're going to do it just like we did the bias band, in that we're going to put the right side of the tie to the wrong side of the sleeve at that underarm seam. So you should have a mark on your band that shows you where the center of the band is. And then you should have another placement line on the band that will go right at the edge of the keyhole. And then you'll be able to pull your gathering threads up so that it'll all match, and this will be the same length as the space for your ties for your sleeve. So you'll do that on both sides of the underarm seam. So I'll go back and put a couple more pins there, and then same way on this side, then that mark will go at that edge of the keyhole. And then you can adjust your gathers as you need to. So that everything will match up. That space will match up with the sleeve. So now that I've got this pinned, I'm going to sew again right on the crease from the where you've pressed it. That's the 1/4 inch mark, and so you can just use that crease as your guide, and you'll be sewing along that bottom edge of your sleeve. When we get that done, I will talk about finishing the ties. So I've got my ties sewn on now, and then gone ahead and refolded the ties so that I could stitch just along that edge to hold them together folded. And then as you get to the sleeve, that tie will just wrap around to the front or the right side of the sleeve, and then you will go ahead and stitch along that edge too, just like you did with the keyhole bias binding edge. And then I like to go ahead and just tie a knot in the ends. I think that the ties and the bow hangs better if it has a little weight. This sleeve is from the Lilah dress, but it can be used in several other things that are children's corner patterns that call for a sleeve. So you couldn't put this in a sleeveless pattern, but you can put it in many of our other patterns that call for either a regular puff sleeve or any other kind of children's corner sleeve. And it just kind of gives it some new interest, and hopefully this has helped you see that it's not all that hard, and certainly that bias band maker makes the folding all of those ties a whole lot quicker and a whole lot easier, and no more burnt fingers.